I don't know about you guys, but I absolutely love playing in paint pigment. Can't you tell? It's been 3 days of scrubbing and this stuff is still all over me. Just wanted to throw that out there in case I look kind of weird. Yeah, that's the stuff I work in on a daily basis, so I look a little pale. But that's besides the point, guys. Right now, we are getting into one of my favorite times of the year, the pre-spawn, whenever those bass are starting to move up and get ready to spawn. Right now, they're at their fattest point. They're going to eat up a little bit more, and then they're going to go lay some babies, which is completely different than what we're talking about today. We're going to talk about the pre-spawn, how to find these fish, and my absolute favorite way to catch these fish, cranking the contours. That's what I call it. That's pretty much what it is, and it works. You can catch some of your biggest fish of the year with nothing but a cranking rod and a crankbait and some map study, looking at navionics and such. We'll get into that in a minute, but this is the time to catch giant bass. The only other time you can do this is bed fishing, and they get kind of big in the fall whenever they're feeding up in the fall transition. But right now, they're just the biggest they're going to get all year, pretty much. I mean, it's time. It's the greatest time of the year. Cranking, springtime, pre-spawn, fatties with a crankbait. This is my absolute all-time favorite way to catch fish in any way, but especially right now, whenever these fish are fat and plump and ready to munch. And finding them is super easy too. They can be really predictable, and you don't really need much to do it. Time on the water, of course, is always key. You don't really have to have a boat to do this, but it does help. And your phone or your laptop, just get on the Navionics website, and you can find some of these key areas that I'm going to mention in today's video. I'll go over some of my crankbaits that I use and the new rod that I'm going to use for deeper cranking this year. I'm so excited about. And we'll just get into the whole realm of crankbaits. There are so many places that I could start with this video, but where I'm going to start at today is right here at home. And that's exactly what I think everybody should do whenever they're trying to catch fish like this. They start at home with their phone or their laptop on the Navionics web app. You can Google it. It's absolutely 100% free. It shows you the contour lines of the lake. Every little line that you see in the lake is a foot depth change. It should be marked. It'll tell you how deep that specific spot is, and that is a huge key player whenever you're trying to find these pre-spawn fish. It's not 100% accurate. It never has been, and it never will be. Water fluctuates, but this can give you a good idea of where those fish are right now. So we're still about mid to early pre-spawn right here in Tennessee. The water has just come out of its lowest point of the year. We're steadily climbing right now. We're cutting 50 close, and wherever you get in that upper 50, mid to upper 50 range, it gets really magical. But we're not there just yet. We're still in what I would consider the pre to mid pre-spawn stage. Whenever those fish are just starting to move off of their winter haunts out deep, they're about to come shallow right now, and that's exactly where you should look, is a little bit deeper. Some of my favorite places to check are points, main lake points going into the back of a creek. That is a dynamite place to fish. You can check the Navionics web app and it'll tell you how deep those contours are. They'll tend to hang out closer to the channel. That's where a boat comes into play at, but the best way to do them is just to fish for them. You can scan around and find them in a creek channel and go back and fish them like you would offshore fishing, but sometimes you just have to blind cast into nothing to find these fish. Places that I'm looking for have rocks on them. Maybe it is a shallower spot with rocks on it, but deep water clear or nearby, that's a good travel route. That's where fish are going to come up during the day, during the daylight hours, whenever the sun is out, which it's not right now for some reason, and they'll munch a little bit. They'll get a little bit of food, and then they go right back out into deeper water. And stuff like that's going to happen throughout the rest of the year as we get closer to the spawn anyway. As that water warms up, those fish are going to go farther and farther back there, and really it just depends on the weather and how the fish feel. You can't really tell them where to be, but right now in the pre to mid pre-spawn, you want to check a little bit deeper. As that water warms, it gets closer to that 55, 56, 57 degree range. I'm going to go deeper in these spawning pockets, these main lake creeks, these big creek arms, and see if I can find them on a graph, but also fish the bank. They'll come up shallow, they'll go deep, they'll try to find some food. As I said, rocks are a really good place to look. A hard bottom is also really key. If you can find a hard bottom or a piece of structure down there, that is absolutely superb. But another one that a lot of people don't talk about during the pre-spawn is a grass line. Fish really like grass lines. In the lakes that I fish, the channel, almost always to the creek channel at least, has grass on it. And those fish will sit right there at that creek channel, and then they just have to move up to the grass. They don't have to go up to the bank and get around rock or find food. They can just go up to the grass, and usually there's some kind of bait fish or something there that they'll eat. That's another place where electronics really come into play. You can find bait. Bait is really important this time of the year. They know what's about to happen. They want to eat up. They want to get fattened up and ready for what they're about to endure with laying all these babies. Really finding them and following them through the creek channel as they get ready to go spawn is the best way that I've found to do it. And then they'll stop following those contour lines, the ones that you see on Navionics, and they'll just go back in the pockets and spawn. Cranking is not really the greatest thing for extremely shallow water, especially fish that are locked down on beds. They just don't want to sit there and eat. They just want to, do what they're doing, and then they want to get back offshore. So whenever they get really far back in there, whenever the water's, around 60, mid 50s to 60s, a lot of times you'll see them spawning. They don't really want a crankbait whenever they're up doing their thing, It's on the way up there and on the way out. Just to dumb all of that down, follow the contour lines. If you can find a shallow spot that just drops off into deep water really quick, there's a good chance that you'll find fish lingering there. If you can reach the creek channel, if you have a boat, or if you can cast to it, great. That's a great way to find fish. Creek channels, the contour lines, all that is so important right now in the pre-spawn. I hope I made that as simple as possible. You don't have to overthink it. Really, it's not that difficult. Just do some study and go out on the lake and fish. That's all we're here to do, is fish. It's not always a competition. Whenever it is, that's a different story, but this is an absolutely great way to catch fish. It starts deep and goes shallow, just as I've said. When those fish are off in the main lake and they're moving up on those points, generally I'm going to throw a deeper diving crankbait depending on how deep the water is. Whenever they're really pre-spawn and that water's still in the upper 40s, mid 40s, I know a lot of people are throwing jerk baits, but I'm throwing something like this, a Magnum crankbait, something that'll get down that 20 to 25 foot range where they like to hover in the wintertime. That's a great bait. And then whenever they start getting on those points, even if they're a shallow point, like 5 or 6 foot, I'm still going to grind it out with something like this 5XD. This is a great all-around bait. It's really awesome during the springtime. Like I said, I love cranking on points with it, humps if I can find some, and even those deep spots I told you about where they're shallow and then they go deep, you can run a crankbait down this or down that, through the channel, all kinds of stuff, and catch some fish. As the fish get more active and they start eating a little bit more, I throw around something like this square bill. This is a good action bait. It's a good reaction bait, and the fish seem to eat it really good when they're, in that pre-spawn phase, trying to get a good meal. This is a killer. That was more of like a 1.5 size square bill, or even a 2.5, but those are good whenever they're in that 5 to 8 foot range. Whenever they get up shallow and they're still munching, they still want to eat, they still want to get some of that food, I'll throw something like this 1.0 size bait, something like that. Nothing big, just something that can get down in front of them and they'll eat it. Pretty simple, right? Not much to it. It's pretty straightforward, but a lot of people tend to overthink it. And they also do the same thing with colors. See, you still want to match the hatch. What I mean by that is match the forage that the fish are already eating. So in my lakes I have a lot of shad. Well, I'm going to throw a shad style crankbait. Same thing with if there's bluegill in the lake. I'm going to throw a bluegill style swim bait. Swim bait? No. Crankbait. Bluegill style crankbait. And as for the crankbaits I use, Academy, the H2O brand, they make some really awesome crankbaits. I throw those 99% of the time. That's the majority of what my box actually is. Academy crankbaits. A few Strike Kings. I love the XD series. They're really nice. The Series 3 were really good crankbaits as well. I used to use those during the late pre-spawn, right before they came up and actually started bedding and all that fun stuff. And last but not least, let's talk about rod and reel and line selection. We'll start off with the deep rods once again, and this year I have a new deep cranking rod. This is the KastKing Perigee 2. You might have heard about it before. It was an Amazon bestseller, but they went and revamped it and changed a few things, and this thing is absolutely sick. This is a 7'6" medium fast rod. Perfect crankbait rod in my opinion for deep crankbaits. Made out of a 24-ton blank. I'll leave a link in the description that tells you more about this rod if you're interested. It's absolutely sick and I'm super stoked to have it. So why this length in action? Well, first off, the 7'6", it'll really whip those crankbaits out there. I want something that can get that lure as far as it'll go. The last third of your cast, or the middle third of your cast, I mean, will be the deepest point that your crankbait reaches. That's where you want the fish at, and that's where the strike zone is. So the farther you can launch it out, the more time you spend in that strike zone. Like I said, this is a medium rod. It has a lot of flex to it, and that is exactly what you need whenever you're crankbait fishing. You don't want to rip those treble hooks out of the fish's mouth. So you need something that's very forgiving. This thing, it's not a noodle, but it's not too hard, shall we say. It's a very soft, gradual bend to it. Perfect for treble hook baits. Onto the reel, I'm using for deep crankbaits a 5-to-1 gear ratio. This is the KastKing Royal Legend Elite. They're color coded, you guys can find them. But this is the perfect cranking reel. You don't want to tire yourself out. This reel is a slow gear ratio. I've done a video on gear ratios before. I'll leave the link in the description as well for that. But you want something slower with these deep crankbaits. Line, I choose 12-pound fluorocarbon. You need a good quality fluorocarbon. I use KastKing. They have a bunch of different kinds that you can check out. So that's my 5XD, my Magnum crankbait, lipless crankbait rod. Now what do I use whenever I'm fishing shallower, those square bills? Well, I choose a 6'6" medium heavy fast action rod. It's still got some tip to it. It's a shorter rod, but you're not trying to launch those crankbaits nearly as far. It still has a lot of that flex, so it doesn't rip those treble hooks right out, and it just keeps the fish pinned. It's the perfect kind of compact, shall we say, sword for bass fishing with shallow diving crankbaits. I'll pick up a faster reel. Something in that 6-to-1 gear ratio range is perfect. You guys have seen I use the Mega Jaws in their 6-to-1 range. It's a KastKing reel. Once again, absolutely perfect for square bills. And that's pretty much what I do during this winter pre-spawn period. Nothing fancy. I like cranking. Of course, there's other ways to catch them, but this is my personal favorite way. Can usually always catch some fish doing it. Of course, it's not always 110%, million% going to work, and that's okay because I absolutely love cranking, but it's a very effective way to catch some fish. I'll leave all my gear in the video, links down below, and like always, I'll see you guys right here next time. I hope you catch some fish, by the way. It's been kind of rough for me. Hopefully you guys can get it did. I'll see you guys next time.